Hello, thank you for having me. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to share screen to get started and put my presentation up. Okay, so my presentation today is called Decoding the Human Bias of Computing Machines, a Critical Code Studies Approach to Algorithmic Bias. During this talk, I will offer some preliminary thoughts on some in-progress work on machine learning and bias. So my name is Mark Marino. I teach at the University of Southern California. I am also the director of the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab there, where we develop and promote um, scholarship in the area of critical code studies. We also sponsor a biennial working group. The next one will be in probably January of 2022. So I'd invite you all to participate in that. Critical Code Studies names methodologies for analyzing the extra functional significance of computer source code. Extra meaning not beyond, but growing out from. Critical Code Studies uses code not as the ends, but as the entryway for an exploration of technoculture. And this definition has evolved over time, and the emphasis has evolved over time. But critical code studies writ large has come to incorporate, amongst other software studies practices, creative coding, the creative use of code for both artistic reasons and critical reasons, and then also developing tools and methodologies for analyzing software using code. So it integrates well with software and platform studies, and then it has its own particular emphasis. So in addition to the criticalcodestudies.com site and the Hacks Lab page, you can also find some more resources in my book, which just came out from MIT Press last year, called Critical Code Studies, where you can find other case studies and examples. So this past year, various scholars joined an anti-racist critical code studies reading group that we were holding. And this was organized by myself and Jeremy Douglas of UC Santa Barbara and Zach Mann and Sarah Siston. Both of them are at USC. And we put this on a Discord to explore code from an anti-racist perspective, drawing on anti-racist approaches, but also critical race studies and other approaches. This reading group, by the way, still exists as a Discord server. So if you have an interest in this topic and you would like to join us, please feel invited. Driven by outrage over the police shootings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and unfortunately others, we decided to explore what it would mean to examine code with an anti-racist framework. And maybe we can make this more broadly to also analyze software from an anti-racist framework. We decided to begin with predictive policing. In the movies, as in these shots from the Minority Report, the film, to do predictive policing, you must lay a white person in a pool and attach some electrodes to their head. In reality, it looks like a suite of software with a friendly, inviting homepage. Here's a tool called Compass, Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. It's got this warm, inviting page and apparently a comforting arm white arm and wrist and hand on the cover. The result of our predictive policing algorithms has been, well, predictable. Racial biases play out across artificial intelligence just as they do on our streets, in our courts, and in our media representations. But in this unjust landscape, defenders have arisen. Consider the work of Joy Buolamwini and her Algorithmic Justice League. You can see more about her work in the documentary Coded Bias, which I highly recommend. Additional heroes have also assembled. Safiya Noble and Ruha Benjamin are working at this intersection of race, technology, and bias. They challenge the algorithms that enact what Benjamin calls the new Jim Code. They have also inspired me to apply their insights about the effects of algorithms to the analysis of code. So what can we learn about algorithmic bias with respect to race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality within and through computer code? Now, this notion of bias, I just want to go back to the definition where it shows up in 1980 in this paper by Tom Mitchell, the paper called The Need for Biases in Learning Generalizations. He writes, only if the program has other sources of information or biases for choosing one generalization over the other, can it non-arbitrarily classify instances beyond those in the training set. Bias here refers to any basis for choosing one generalization over another, other than strict consistency with the observed training instances. So, by this token, bias is at the heart of machine learning. But this meaning of bias is not the same as prejudice in the kind we're talking about in other instances. So now let's get some context. In the United States, incarceration looks like this, where we have imprisoned more people per capita than any other nation. And this is a visualization, graphic data visualization that was produced by the Prison Policy Initiative. So that is hardly a dignified distinction. And now, of course, increasingly, people are using, whole police departments are using tools such as PredPol in order to determine how they should allocate resources based on this predictive policing. So, in the anti-racist reading group, we have been trying to understand this software that exists primarily in a black box. We're looking at then a recreation of PredPol, or predictive policing, the software that was made by researchers in Southampton. Because again, we're trying to get access to see what the code can tell us about the processes. But again, realizing that this is a functional equivalent is what we're working with right here. And this is the primary problem that I've been trying to solve for the past 6 months or so. How do you analyze code you can't access? But our conversation about the predictive policing code has led me to believe that predictive policing is hopelessly biased in the sense of prejudice. In other words, the underlying presumptions of predictive policing that crime can be quantified and patterns can be measured from previous records and then predicted only reifies a racist history of judicial oppression. So that's turned my attention a little bit away from the predictive policing software because, again, I think its fundamental assumptions are problematic on levels that are that destabilize the whole enterprise. But still, we end up with this problem. How can we analyze code that we cannot access? And I just want to keep this in the back. This is something we've been struggling with in critical code studies a lot. So we turned our attention to a system that's perhaps just as unjust and is using machine learning processes as well, the bail system. So in the United States, again, the bail system disproportionately impacts Black and Latino or Hispanic Americans. So here's this visualization from the Prison Policy Initiative that says people detained pre-trial because they can't pay bail are much poorer than their peers, and the income gaps are widest for Black people. And then, of course, you know, plenty of studies show that when jurors see people come in from who have not posed bail, so they come in custody, that affects things in judges as well, as opposed to those who come in their street clothes and come from their homes, right? So this bail system is built-in inequity, and then we're going to add some software into the mix. This black box of software. But I'm going to put this black box of software next to the black box of the prison industrial complex, a black box that is imprisoning disproportionately Black and brown bodies in the United States. So there is software that has been used for this bail system. That's that Compass software that I showed you earlier. And the organization ProPublica has done an analysis of this software. They did a really wonderful publication called Machine Bias, when they focused on how this bail software comes into play. And their argument that they lay out about how the software disproportionately, again, it's going to call first-time offenders who are African-American, they're going to call them riskier than their white counterparts, given similar situational criteria. They augment this argument by including a Git repository. So I want to get to that in a second. And their investigation analyzes Compass, again, which was created by this company called North Point, which, by the way, has tried to add equity more to its branding, I guess, by renaming itself Equivant. So while the unseen code of Compass and other bail setting software is the cause of the problem, researchers, journalists are using software processes to analyze how it works. So this is one way we can get into that black box. Here's the GitHub repository of the ProPublica analysis of the Compass code. Again, we're still locked out of that black box, but here's an open public software project to systematically test Compass software on a data set that also is publicly available. As part of this assembly of evidence, ProPublica also offers a Jupyter notebook that includes portions of their code that's annotated. And this really marks an important moment in public discourse where not only is code part of the public journalistic process, but it is being shared as part of the argument, as part of the evidence with those who are trying to, I guess, evaluate what they're being presented with. Now, there are other tools that are out there as well. I want to throw out there this one from the University of Chicago. It's called Aquitus. It is also free and publicly available for you to try to analyze software or the results of software like Compass to measure for bias and fairness. And again, in this sense of prejudice that we're talking about. So here's another software system built to help you do data analysis to, again, figure out what's going on inside of that black box. I also want to point out the work of one of our Hacks Lab members, Catherine Griffiths, who now teaches at the University of Michigan. Catherine did this really wonderful project where she was building visualizations of machine learning. And this particular one you can watch on her website, IsoHail. She's got animations of how the algorithm sorts through the various data sets, right? As it's making its decisions all the way along. So, and these visualizations she's put out there can help to show lots of things. You can see errors in the system. You could see, sort of quirky decisions that it makes, and then you can work as you're training your system to be a little bit more accurate. Now, just to extend this work of ProPublica, there is also, someone has taken the ProPublica, their Jupyter notebook, and they've imported it into Google Collaboratory. So Google Collaboratory, if you're not familiar with it, is a platform for sharing Jupyter notebooks as though they were Google Docs. So you can go into this Google Doc and you can execute the code. You can manipulate the code and execute it. So if you wanted to test, and we can do this a little bit later in the talk if there's time, if you want to test some of the processes that ProPublica was using and maybe make changes to the criteria or how or the kind of data you're trying to call forth, you could use this notebook. So this is an important moment I just want to underscore, because, my initial supposition with critical code studies was that code is meaningful. Okay, but here is code being put to use, not as an illustration in the sense of an image that you might put into a particular article that you're writing, but an activated part of your argument that you're inviting readers in to access, to manipulate, to change, to extend, to revise, and to execute to see how it operates. So code it doesn't exist as a static rhetorical means in this context. It is a dialogic tool for communication. Okay, and I did want to just extend a little bit before we go by showing you a bit of the ported ProPublica code into Python in the Google Collaboratory, so you can get a sense. And this is a copy I've made of their document. So again, in the Collaboratory, we can begin the processes. I've got to run all of these or execute all of these. And, a lot of these, we're just going to be doing simple calls to get some data, right, from the Compass results. But as we go through this process, we're going to see the production of the evidence. So this is correlation with stay between the stay length and the Compass scores. Okay, and of course we get the demographic breakdown in terms of age, in terms of race, comparisons with the different types of defenders. We can find out the scores. Now we can see the cross tabulations, again, how they're being distributed across racial categories, across sex. So again, once we have access to these analytical tools, again, it's not the same as having the Compass software. And again, this is the kind type of thing that someone else could write up and do their own analyses. But by including these in the argumentation, ProPublica is inviting people to make alterations and to do their own adaptations on this statistical analysis. Again, those are processes we've had open to us in the past. Just by sharing the data, they can make these open to others, or just by describing their processes. But to me, this is a different kind of watershed moment where someone is sharing the code of their mathematical processes, whether they're analytical processes, and inviting people to, again, transform these in various ways. And I also think that since we have artists gathered here as well, I want to encourage you all to think about the usefulness of things like Jupyter Notebooks and the Google Collaboratory in particular as a platform for artistic expression. And again, it does shift our topic slightly, but I will show you one example before we conclude. That so I've been working on a story lately. This is a first attempt that incorporates a Google Collaboratory Jupyter Notebook into the story itself, so that for readers to read this story, they have to actually execute the code, and then they're invited to change the code, which changes the outcome of the story as you're reading. And again, I don't want to distract us too much from our larger question, which I'm going to return to now. How can we analyze code we cannot access? Well, I've given you some examples that I think we can talk a little bit more about now. And the first way is we can, of course, test it, right? And those tests we can conduct with additional software that is either auditing software, right? Or that is, you know, could be bespoke software, or you can download the stuff that we got from ProPublica. You know, we can share software practices. But then the other thing I just want to throw out there as an extension of this is then we by making these pieces of code available to readers, then not only does the results of their processes become part of an argument that counteracts bias, but we're also we're opening up this larger black box and inviting people into our code, and by extension, giving them entryways to critiquing other code that's inaccessible to them. And then, of course, the codes that we're trying to figure out underneath is the black box of systematic oppression, right, where the unwritten laws of bigotry and prejudice and bias, the unwritten rules of racial supremacy operate and function in ways where a lot of the times too, we only see the evidence through the systems of, right? We only see the outcomes of the inequality and inequity. We don't get to see the processes aren't always made plain. And so the software practices, the auditing tools, the visualizations, and then the sort of open notebooks, those are starting points that, and some tools, some beginning places where we can begin to invite a larger conversation, and a conversation that's happening about software processes, about code, but being enacted through code that's open and invites people in to experiment with, explore, revise, and extend. So I'm going to leave it there for now so that we can transition into some discussion. Again, I just want to invite you to take a look at what we have to offer at the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab. If you are interested in joining our discussion in the Discord, please contact me. And then also, please keep an eye out for our calls for participation in our 2022 Critical Code Studies Working Group, where we'll no doubt be taking up many of these issues as well. Okay, and with that, I believe we're going to transition into some discussion. So thank you very much.